Continuation. There was time that I felt so much hopelessness that I even considered stabbing myself with a sharply serrated knife for the challah, the braided Jewish bread that Moshe used to cut every Saturday. But then I thought that I might just bleed and not die, and I would not prove anything to my family. It's interesting how he doesn't eat chazer, pig, but eats like a chazer. Or he wears the kippah on his head dutifully in symbol of humility to God, but especially acts like a king on the Shabbat table and at any other time. Another hurtful episode was that Menachem, my aunt's older son, paid no attention to me. He was married at the time and his wife was pregnant. One time he was teasing me over the fact that I was laughing hysterically at the sight of his protruding index finger, as he was showing it to me on purpose to get me laughing. Laughing helps me forget my sorrow, and I would force a laugh for the silliest reasons. I moved and playfully touched his finger for him to not tease me, and his wife went ballistic for me touching him, which was unhealthy for her because she was pregnant. Since then, Menachem has not paid particular attention to me. Our childhood memories went to complete oblivion for him. The longer I remained in the household, the angrier I felt that I didn't know where to transfuse it out of my system. At the mention of God, I would tell Moshe, "You're God," because I saw the hypocritical living that I was subjected to and knew it was no following of God. Rather, it was the maintenance of ritualistic living to make oneself feel as though you were with God. I knew that even before I came to know Christ. One time, Moshe made a comment about the Gentiles believing in Christ. Why are they blaming us for killing him if they believe his death atoned for their sins? I knew very little about Jesus at the time, but I did know that he treated that topic with mockery. And just to spite him, I told him that I wished to have been born a Christian and not Jewish, although I had no idea what that meant. By and by, there would be times that I couldn't recognize myself because my anger started to define me. My aunt noticed that and asked, "Where did you get so much malice from?" I insidiously turned into a monster that I was afraid of myself, afraid of its unleashing to the outside world, but it was encumbering me to a state of spiritual poisoning and discomfort. My outlet was singularly focused on my studies to measures of obsession. I didn't do anything but read, translate, and be fortified by books in which the act of mind sharpening had been my fortress. During Purim, which is a dress-up holiday since we lived in a religious society, it was accustomed to allow complete strangers into your house and dance in jubilance, and also reckless drinking was allowed. I asked Moshe what was the big deal with vodka, and he asked me if I wanted to try, while my grandma shouted that he had gone completely mad. I was only 13. Out of curiosity, I tried. My eyes bulged out in redness from this one sip, and I never touched the garbage again. During Passover, we were not allowed to eat bread, and I was craving it. Grandma and I would smuggle it into our room and eat it stingily, which practice actually became quite fun, as its illegality exhilarated me to do just the opposite, much like the prohibition of alcohol in the early 20th century in the United States. Before the start of Passover, I told Moshe that I wouldn't be able to survive without bread. But during the actual Seder, the practice of being surrounded by relatives and commemorating the story of Exodus, I stuffed myself with tasteless, round matzah ceaselessly. Moshe smirked and said, "You see, you can get used to the matzah." I replied, "The only reason why I eat it is because it reminds me of bread." I sensed that his breathing broke out of rhythm after I said that. He was trying to make me respect his authority, and the more he tried, the more daring I became against it. Just like I was getting increasingly angry, Moshe was increasingly begrudging me. One day, he barged into my room and exclaimed, "At chatichat zona, you are a piece of prostitute." It was interesting how he just barged into my room. I could have been naked for all I care, but I was 13 at the time, and honestly speaking, I didn't know what he meant by that. I never have had intercourse, but I knew he wanted to demean me. At the time that he barged in, I was studying English, not bothering anybody. I looked fixatedly into his eyes with a piercing silence, and he wouldn't dare to look back at me, seemingly overflowed by his own sense of shame. At the time, I didn't understand what was happening between us, but I understood later on in my years that he was attracted to my 13-year-old body and was blaming me for it. I was fully covered with unattractive clothing. I don't know what else he wanted from me. After my piercing, questioning stare at him, petite in size against the odds of hugeness like David and Goliath, he left the room. Since that comment, everything started to spiral downwards. Moshe set my aunt against me. Because of my revealing, unabashed, and daring resistance, my aunt came down and tried to choke me. And unknowing about Jesus's saying to put your other cheek, I did just that. Whoever hits you on the cheek, offer him the other also. And whoever takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him either. Luke 6:29. I interlocked my hands behind my back and let her do whatever she pleased, thinking that I did not wish to turn into such a monster, but at the same time I felt that I loved her too much to try to defend myself and hurt her. I knew that the real monster, Moshe, was talking her ear off against me, and I shouldn't blame her. With many altercations on the Sabbath day, when you are supposed to accept strangers into your house, she did not allow me or my grandma to the Sabbath table. My grandma tried to talk sense into her, but my aunt's indignant attitude towards me grew stronger and more heated towards my grandma because grandma was on my side. The atmosphere of the house overflowed with poignant negativity. While being in the room, grandma wanted to eat and consulted with me if she should talk to my aunt, and I knew that grandma had diabetes and needed to eat, so I said, of course, go talk to her. I heard Grandma remind her who helped her get to this country, Willie, my great-uncle, and remind her that we are a family and that Grandma was hungry. My aunt ferociously screamed at Grandma that she was protecting a whore and commanded her to knock back as if she was a kind of animal. Then I heard shrill screams and yells back and forth, and the floor was thundering as they were upstairs and I was downstairs, at which point I understood that they were fighting. My heart was thumping uncontrollably, and I went to the backyard and propped open the back door as I was in a nightgown. I heard my aunt uproariously thumping off the stairs and wildly opening the door of my room in an intention to beat me, but luckily I wasn't there. She saw the back door open and went out. I was lucky that I walked out because otherwise she would have viciously beat me. But as I saw her, her face was full of animalistic scratch marks and blood was gushing out. She hesitated to beat me because she knew I would have screamed and the neighbors would have heard, which would have earned her a bad reputation. So she just approached, forcefully pushed me and said, "Ukhati, leave." I felt so hurt because I knew that monstrosity stemmed from Moshe's poisoning her spirit. Moshe has completely destroyed any union of our family ties and instilled his malignancy towards my aunt. When she pushed me away, I went to the swings and cried, thinking of my aunt and knowing that she was suffering not less than me. She supported the family, did so much for everybody, and Moshe's demands just tore her up into pieces that she exploded on me. I don't blame her because my negative vibes combined with Moshe's were virtually intolerable. I was stubborn not less than her husband, but stubborn for my freedom, and he was stubborn for depriving me of it. As I cried, my jaw started uncontrollably clanking. Grandma came out the door looking just as much scratched up as my aunt, and she motioned me to come with her. We dressed up and went to her cousin Soma, who, thank the Lord, did not have his wife at home at the time. She was on vacation at her daughter's. She could be such a nuisance. I stayed in his place for 2 weeks while Grandma tried to figure out the next step for me. She knew I couldn't stay in New York any longer. My aunt demanded that I go back to Israel, but Grandma refused to hear of it, and she asked Uncle Willie to take me in. At the time, I no longer wanted to go back to Israel. I put far too much effort into my studies to let everything just dissipate into oblivion. My Aunt Rita, Willie's wife, agreed, telling me through the phone that she expected me to commit to my education, and Grandma reconfirmed her expectation, and I tripled it. With abundance of tears and heavy-heartedness, Grandma set me on the plane alone again to Southern California, Orange County, Brea. On the airplane, I heard a song about a shining star, and I convinced myself that I would be that shining star, that I would make a strong presence amongst those who know me and cross my path, that I would persevere no matter what, that I would develop unforgettable friendships, and nothing would obstruct me, my set-mindedness. Another song came to me while flying, which was a Russian song that I learned from my aunt and Grandma while preparing for a Sabbath table, singing it while Moshe was in the synagogue. It was a song about the power of a smile. On YouTube, you can listen to «От улыбки хмурый день светлее». From a smile, gloomy day is brighter. I remember to myself that friendship begins from a smile. And with the attitude of no more sullen faces for me, I landed. May 26, 2004, I arrived to Orange County, California.